9 years ago, a man of honor, a former officer who had once worn the Indian Navy's uniform with pride and later turned to building a life of honest enterprise, was abducted in broad daylight by terrorists backed by the Pakistani deep state. Since then, Kulbhushan Jadhav has been paraded like a trophy, condemned without trial, and vilified through a narrative so hollow it collapses under the weight of its own contradictions. And now, almost a decade later, Pakistan's elite mouthpieces, Sherry Rahman and that dynastic mannequin masquerading as a de facto foreign minister, Bilawal Bhutto, have dared to invoke his name once again, this time to do the unthinkable. They attempt to draw a laughable equivalence, placing Kulbhushan Jadhav, a kidnapped Indian citizen, at the same level as the blood soaked monsters of Lashkar-e-Toiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed, and the other Islamist jihadi death squads that Pakistan has groomed, funded, and unleashed upon the world. This is obscenity masquerading as diplomacy. To equate a solitary, unarmed man abducted by the jihadist militia with the architects of global terror is not just intellectually bankrupt, it's a moral perversion, you see, only possible in a regime where truth is disposable and the human decency is extinct. Welcome to the Drishtikone show, where we go beyond the noise, pierce through the propaganda, and expose the phenomena and actions that others are too afraid to touch or approach. This is not just about politics, you see. It's about rediscovering the truth. Today, we want to discuss about Kulbhushan Jadhav and his tragic case and focus on the utterly depraved and vicious ways of the Pakistani establishment and their completely inept agencies who can only survive in a world of lies, deception, and fraud. To believe in Pakistan's narrative is to believe in ghosts. The Pakistanis said that Mr. Jadhav had entered Balochistan province to provide quote unquote naval fighting training to the Balochi rebels in a region that is predominantly mountainous and a desert. China had taken over the coastal areas for its own ports. But here was a master spy sent by RNAW, the Indian intelligence, to destabilize an entire province single handedly. It's been 9 years and no other Indian spy has ever been caught by Pakistan. Only Kulbhushan Jadhav, 9 years, only one man on a mission to destabilize the entire province. So they have been telling the world that a professional intelligence agency like RNAW created an entire mission where only one spy was sent to undertake a huge mission of this proportion. What exactly are the Pakistanis really trying to sell? That Kulbhushan Jadhav, a lone businessman, was in fact a one-man wrecking crew, something like a Sunny Deol from Gadar, who crossed into their territory, infiltrated the most secure regions of Balochistan, ignited an entire insurgency, and managed all this without a single accomplice, without a network, without funding, and without leaving a single trace. No other RNAW agent was ever caught. Not one asset was uncovered. No arms, no communications, no logistics. Just one man with a passport. Is that espionage? It's a Bollywood potboiler on fentanyl level mindlessness. Frankly, even a 6-year-old with a functioning brain and a nose for nonsense would throw the script in the trash. And yet, the Pakistani establishment, its army, its government, its ministers, even its prime minister, continue to peddle this cartoonish fantasy with straight faces and solemn declarations. And what are we to conclude? That Pakistan's intelligence agencies are staffed by C-grade storytellers with the IQ of a burnt toast? Or that they are so staggeringly, spectacularly incompetent that this is the best that they could conjure up after a 9-year lie? Either way, the result is the same. Do you call this intelligence? Nah. This is state sponsored stupidity. And their story, let's drop the pleasantries, okay? It's not just false, it's industrial strength bullshit. Even if one were to momentarily suspend disbelief and accept Pakistan's stupid fable that a lone ex Navy officer armed with nothing but an Indian passport and in the ghost of James Bond waltzed into Balochistan to orchestrate an entire insurgency, one would still hesitate to insult the ISI by assuming that they had that few brain cells. Even Pakistan's intelligence agencies, which is an oxymoron, for all their tragic comedies and terror tourism, deserve the courtesy of being credited with more than a teaspoon of competence. You see? So, in absence of passing the Pakistani intelligence agencies off as full of people with intellectual depth of a dried puddle in Quetta, one can safely assume that their story is complete baloney. So, what is the real story? Kulbhushan Jadhav was no phantom or spy. He was a man of the seas, a retired commander of the Indian Navy who had settled into a new life of business, running a legitimate operations in Chabahar, Iran. The Chabahar port, India's strategic gateway to Central Asia and Afghanistan, had been developed with Indian cooperation. Jadav was part of that effort, an entrepreneur working within the Iranian sovereignty. He wasn't in Balochistan. He wasn't smuggling arms. He wasn't organizing militias. He was kidnapped. The true architects of his disappearance was not some shadowy agents, but brutal Sunni jihadists, Jaish al-Adil, a Salafist terrorist outfit aligned with Al-Qaeda. They kidnapped Jadhav near the Iranian-Pakistani border. This organization is led by Salahuddin Farooqi. This Sunni extremist group is responsible for murdering many Shia pilgrims, assassinating Iranian guards, and sabotaging regional stability. Iran has officially designated Jaish al-Adil as a terrorist organization. The group abducted Jadhav, allegedly with the support of Pakistani spy agency ISI, and smuggled him across the border. From that moment onwards, the propaganda machinery began its dirty work in Pakistan. On March 29th, 2016, Pakistan released a confession video. It was their trophy, a heavily edited, suspiciously scripted piece of theater. A forensic analysis by the Indian intelligence exposed glaring inconsistencies. It was a splice audio and had mismatched facial expressions. It was heavily edited with cuts that destroyed any chain of authenticity, a supposed confession that appeared rehearsed and scripted. No credible intelligence agency in the world would present such a tampered video as evidence of espionage. Unless, of course, the objective was not justice, but narrative warfare. Pakistan claimed that Kulbhushan Jadhav carried an Indian passport under the alias of Hussein Mubarak Patel, a laughable assertion. Which trained spy in the 21st century carries his own country's passport into enemy territory? Would James Bond enter Moscow flashing his British passport? Would a Mossad agent step into Iran holding an Israeli ID? Even for Pakistan, it was a new low. You see, when you factor in the basic constructs of Pakistan's rubbish story and the plausible logic of India's factual take, one can see very easily that if all the Pakistani have on the so called Indian terrorism is a one man Sunny Deol or Rambo like army, and the fact that they caught no other Indian, confirms the Indian explanation that Kulbhushan's case was of a kidnapping and a swap deal with the jihadis. No other explanation, certainly not from the smart asses of Rawalpindi, makes any sense. There was more to Jadav's abduction than a spy operation. There was an economic sabotage as well. Chabahar, the Iranian port India helped fund and operate, had emerged as a strategic counterweight to Pakistan's Chinese backed Gwadar port. The success of Chabahar threatened the China Pakistan Economic Corridor, or the CPEC, which is a cornerstone of Beijing and Islamabad's imperial dreams. Jadhav was collateral. His abduction was a message. India's presence in Iran, politically, economically, strategically, had to be dismantled. And what better way than to frame a businessman as a saboteur? The ISI's move was not about catching a spy, it was about neutralizing Indian influence on Iran's soil. As India reeled from the shock, some of India's own journalists found new depths to stoop to. Karan Thapar, a poster boy of the nepotistic world of Indian journalism, started questioning Kulbhushan Jadhav's background. He parroted Pakistan's propaganda in his column for the Indian Express. He wrote about Kulbhushan's double passport, a claim even Pakistan's own officials had contradicted with varying locations of his arrest, Chaman versus Saravan. He cited unnamed sources and played devil's advocate, not in the pursuit of truth, but as devil's mouthpiece itself. There was no mention of Jaishul Adil. Karan Thapar did not mention Salahuddin Farooqi. He made no inquiry into ISI's involvement. Instead, Karan Thapar and others like him chose to amplify the foreign narrative while a fellow Indian's life hung by a thread in a Pakistani prison. When diplomacy failed and Pakistan continued to parade its propaganda with theatrical confessions and forged narratives, India turned to the international law. In 2017, India filed a petition at the International Court of Justice, the ICJ, at The Hague, challenging the death sentence handed down to Kulbhushan Jadhav by Pakistan's kangaroo military court. And there, in the hallowed halls of international jurisprudence, the facade of Pakistan's case unraveled spectacularly. Representing India was Harish Salve, the former Solicitor General of India, calm, precise, and surgical. Representing Pakistan was Khawar Qureshi, a Queen's Counsel from the UK. The difference in their preparedness, reasoning, and articulation was so glaring. It was less a courtroom exchange and more a clinical evisceration by Salve of Qureshi. Salve presented not just a legal argument, he laid out a devastating indictment of Pakistan's conduct, no consular access to Jadhav, in a clear violation of Article 36 of the Vienna Convention, a military secret trial with no public record, no transcript, and no defense. No evidence of espionage, only an edited video confession made under duress. Salve pointedly exposed the inconsistencies in Pakistan's narrative, the different location of Kulbhushan's arrest, the farcical passport logic, and the laughable suggestion that RNAW sent a lone man to spark an insurgency. He made it clear to the court this was not a case of espionage, but of state sponsored kidnapping and a show trial persecution. Qureshi, in contrast, resorted to rhetorical bluster, dubious claims, and procedural distractions. He was visibly rattled, defensive, and eventually reduced to parroting Pakistan's official line with no legal gravitas. The ICJ ruled in India's favor in July 2019. Pakistan was ordered to suspend the execution of Kulbhushan Jadhav, review and reconsider the conviction and sentence, and grant India consular access without further delay. It wasn't complete justice, but it was a global slap on Pakistan's face. And Harish Salve's performance was not just a legal win, it was a restoration of dignity, a reminder to the world that India would not let its sons rot in foreign dungeons without a fight. In December 2017, under pressure from International Court of Justice, Pakistan begrudgingly allowed Kulbhushan Jadhav's mother and wife to meet him. What should have been a sacred, solemn, private moment, a reunion of blood and bond, was twisted into a grotesque spectacle. Pakistan, true to its vile instincts, couldn't suppress its degeneracy for very long. You see, it was no humanitarian gesture, it was a carefully staged ambush. Cameras were planted like landmines, microphones lurked in every corner, every blink, every tear, every tremor of a grieving mother's lips were captured, not for empathy, but for exploitation. They didn't organize a meeting, they choreographed a humiliation of those women. The mother and the wife walked out, stripped of their dignity, their bangles were removed, their bindis were erased, their voices had broken down. The waiting Pakistani journalists at that time pounced like trained hyenas. The media heckled them. The state just watched. And the foreign ministry, they had the gall to thank that vile media for a job well done. That's what they said. That was not consular access, it was a psychological warfare on two unarmed Indian women. And it told the world exactly what kind of state Pakistan really is. You see, there are crimes of war, there are crimes of humanity. But what Pakistan did that day was both. In the years following Kulbhushan's abduction, some of those involved in his kidnapping have met with their own end. Mufti Shah Mir, a Jamaat Islami Islam Fazlullah terrorist, accused of helping ISI abduct Jadav, was shot down by unknown gunmen in Balochistan. Mullah Umar Irani, a Jaish al-Adil operative tied to Jadav's kidnapping, was killed in Turbat, reportedly by Pakistan's own intelligence itself. It was as if ISI was cleaning up its loose ends. The plot had grown probably too dirty even for its own architects, you see. As of today, Kulbhushan Jadhav remains in a Pakistani prison, neither a free man nor a convicted one, trapped in legal purgatory, forgotten by the media, ignored by his very own. His mother still waits, his wife still pleads, and India still negotiates silently, strategically, probably helplessly right now. And the man at the center of this geopolitical crucifixion, Kulbhushan Jadhav, he still bears the name of an Indian citizen, a patriot, a prisoner. The story of Kulbhushan Jadhav is not just about espionage or abduction. It is a larger story of geopolitical sabotage by Pakistan to curb Indian influence in Iran, religious radicalism, religious radicalism used as a tool of foreign policy by ISI and the Sunni jihadists like Jaish al-Adil, state-sanctioned cruelty against the families of prisoners, media betrayal by India's own journalists parroting enemy lies. And above all, it is a story of silence, the suffocating silence that follows a man who's betrayed by the world, abandoned by narratives, and sacrificed at the altar of diplomacy. Most importantly, forgotten by his own people. As the 10th year approaches, one question echoes louder than all others. Where is Kulbhushan Jadhav's justice? Indeed, where is the justice to him? And to Sherry Rahman and that Sheen Store Trudeau knockoff you parade around Bilawal Bhutto, let this be said with absolute clarity. Enough. Enough of dragging a kidnapped Indian citizen, a helpless man torn from the Iranian soil, into your sick little circus of lies. Enough of spinning fairy tales so absurd they insult even the limited intelligence that fuels your ministries. This fiction that you have stitched together of a one man insurgency armed with nothing but a passport and a camera is not just tired, it reeks like a propaganda corpse kept on life support by 9 years, rotting behind your microphones and marble podiums. Your story doesn't hold, you see. Your script is worn out, And the world is no longer buying what you're selling, not even at a discount. And so here's a suggestion: retire this rotten lie, please. Bury it. And if you must sell falsehoods to survive as a nation, at least write some new ones. Because this turd has aged. And now it stinks of your own desperation. This is Drishtikone, where we look deeper, where we tell stories that others won't. If this story helped you understand the geopolitical situation around India and the world better, please subscribe, like, and share. And do click that bell icon, please. Most importantly, tell us in the comments what are your emotions and thoughts at the completely heartless, vile, and obnoxious Pakistani establishment, journalists, commentators, and the leaders who have been humiliating a man whom they abducted only because their intelligence had to make up a story. Also, share what you think of the ridiculous story by the Pakistanis on Kulbhushan Jadhav. And until next time, Jai Hind.